The Kremlin insists there are no grounds to say that Russia had defaulted on its foreign currency sovereign debt. The Kremlin spokesman said the claims were absolutely wrong.
По сути говоря, будут означать прямое воровство. Прямое воровство. Вот. И вот эти вот утверждения о дефолте тоже, они в данном случае абсолютно неправомерны, потому что еще в мае в валюте необходимый платеж был совершен. А тот факт, что Евроклир удержал эти деньги, не довел их до получателей, ну, это уже не наша проблема. То есть в данном случае здесь никаких оснований называть эту ситуацию дефолтом нет.
Well, the 30-day grace period on $100 million worth of bonds expired yesterday. As of late last night, bondholders say they have not received payments. This technically puts Moscow in the default zone. And Bloomberg News reported that Russia defaulted on its foreign currency sovereign debt for the first time in more than a century. And the Russian authorities have accused the West of seeking to drive Moscow into an artificial default, saying it has the money to pay. Punishing Western sanctions on Russia has largely severed the country from the international financial system, making it difficult for Moscow to service its debt. Around a half of Russian gold and foreign exchange reserves, some $300 billion, were earlier blocked by Western sanctions imposed after Moscow sent troops to Ukraine. Stuart Smith joins us live from Moscow. Stuart, even though the Kremlin denies having defaulted, the fact remains that Russia failed to pay about $100 million in interest on two government bonds. So how does Russia plan to come out of this situation?
Yeah, that's right. And the US says that this just goes to show how strong the US sanctions are on the Russian economy. But the Kremlin is adamant that this changes nothing, that this declaration of a default by the West for Western investors is something that only affects the West, not Russia itself. In the minds of the government in Russia, those debts were paid. They allocated this money, this $100 million, to an account within Russia, which is now ready to be picked up, in effect, by these investors through their banks. But of course, that hasn't happened. And that's where the disagreement comes. The money's there. It just hasn't made its way yet to investors. Now, those investors have the option, if an official default is agreed upon by insurance providers, of potentially claiming that money back by those insurance providers. But for the Russian economy itself, it's a different situation because there is no access to the bond markets at the moment in Russia. Investors were all too aware many months before this declaration of a default was made that something like this was likely to happen. And so in terms of what it means for Russia's economy right now, very little.
Mm-hmm. So the possibility of default certainly have raised the question about the cash flow of the Russian government. So how will this impact Moscow's ability to continue funding the war in Ukraine?
Well, as it is, this is a symbolic moment, even if not necessarily meaningful in terms of how investors are seeing Russia from last week to this week. Because what it does mean is that in the long term, there is the potential for huge damage to the Russian economy because investors will be wary, very wary of dealing with Russia with the potential that Western sanctions in the future could affect it again. Now, in the short term, in terms of financing that so-called special military operation, as it must be described here, there is little problem because this money is not being used to finance the military's efforts. It's not looking, Russia right now, for investment to finance military operations. In fact, its current account surplus is more this year than it was last year. The danger for Russia comes if this goes on for much longer than a few more months. If this is something that starts to take years, and if other Western sanctions are imposed and that current accounts balance goes down, well, then Russia's unlikely to be able to rely on foreign investment to get any more funds, nor likely to be able to rely on any sort of intervention from abroad in terms of investment in Russia. And so that could cause a problem.
Mm-hmm. And also, Stuart, the G7 countries appear to be coming to a consensus to limiting Moscow's profits from rising energy prices. So what impact would this have on Russia's economy?
Yeah, well, we understand now it's certainly still in the coming to a consensus phase. The things that have been mooted by the G7 involve implementing even more sanctions of the like we've seen already, technological ones, ones that affect the industry, the services sector, but also gold exports. That could be quite big. After energy, oil and gas, gold is Russia's second largest export, affecting around 15 billion US dollars, and 90% of it goes to G7 countries. So that would be another hit to Russia's economy and ability to get funds. The big one people are talking about is this oil price cap. It would be a way to allow Russia to export oil while also bringing the price down. The difficulty now is sanctions against oil have actually only made the price go up, and therefore Russia's revenue from oil exports is higher than last year. It's not what the West intended, and the plan with a price cap involving some quite convoluted economics is that the oil would still be able to be exported, but by placing restrictions on, for example, shipping insurance, that would force Russia to export at a low price, meaning other countries around the world are happy, oil price goes down, inflation goes down, but at the same time still pinching the Russian economy. But we're talking about weeks and months here before something like that may be implemented. If it does, that could be a way that really starts to put pressure on the economy, because so far that has been lacking.
Stuart, thank you so much indeed for your report. Stuart Smith reporting from Moscow.